Imagine for a moment that everything you see, hear, and feel is not a mirror of the world outside, but a story your brain is constantly telling itself. A narrative constructed from fragments of information stitched together with expectation, memory, and guesswork. What if I told you that reality, as you know it, is less about what is out there, and more about what your mind predicts will be out there? Every perception you trust, every certainty you cling to, is the outcome of a subtle negotiation between incoming signals and prior experience. And in those moments when the world surprises you, when illusions deceive or familiar patterns falter, you are witnessing the invisible machinery of your own consciousness at work. Today, we step into that hidden realm, where your brain is not merely a receiver of reality, but its most daring architect, crafting a version of the world uniquely yours. It is here, in this delicate interplay of prediction and perception, that we begin to understand the profound truth. The reality you inhabit is, in essence, a carefully orchestrated hallucination, and by exploring it, we glimpse the astonishing science of what it truly means to be conscious. Reality is something we often take for granted, imagining it as a solid, external truth that exists independently of us. We assume that the world we see, hear, touch, and feel is a faithful representation of an objective reality that exists out there, waiting for us to discover it. Yet, modern neuroscience challenges this intuition at its very core. The first key point, that reality is not a fixed external truth, but is actively constructed by the brain, forces us to reconsider everything we believe about perception, experience, and consciousness. What we call reality is not a passive reflection of the world. It is an active, ongoing process shaped by the brain's predictions, expectations, and interpretations. At every moment, our sensory organs gather immense amounts of information about the environment. Photons hit our retinas, sound waves vibrate our eardrums, chemicals stimulate taste buds and olfactory receptors, and mechanical forces stimulate touch and proprioception. This flood of raw data is incredibly complex, noisy, and incomplete. If the brain were to simply record this information as it comes in, our experience of the world would be fragmented, confusing, and often misleading. Instead, the brain constructs a coherent, continuous reality by integrating incoming sensory signals with prior knowledge, memories, and learned patterns. It does not wait passively for data to arrive. It anticipates and predicts what the world is likely to be like based on experience. This predictive process is central to how we perceive the world. Vision, for example, is not a matter of passively registering photons hitting the retina. Our brain continuously generates hypotheses about what it expects to see, compares these predictions to the actual sensory input, and then updates its internal model accordingly. When predictions align with incoming signals, perception feels seamless and effortless. When there is a mismatch, we experience surprise, confusion, or error, which can manifest as illusions or misperceptions. Consider the phenomenon of optical illusions. When we look at a distorted image, we immediately interpret it as familiar objects or patterns, even though the image itself does not contain the structure we perceive. This occurs because the brain fills in gaps and resolves ambiguity by relying on past experience and contextual cues. Reality, in this sense, is not purely given. It is a carefully constructed narrative, shaped as much by the brain's expectations as by the external environment. What we consider objective reality is therefore inseparable from subjective experience. The way you perceive the world is fundamentally influenced by your prior knowledge, cultural background, emotional state, and even moment-to-moment attention. Two people witnessing the same event may perceive it differently, not merely because of bias, but because their brains construct the incoming sensory information according to different predictive models. This is not a flaw in perception, it is how perception works. Consciousness itself is entwined with this predictive process. Your brain does not simply produce sensory impressions, it produces a coherent, unified experience of self within a world. The boundaries between what is inside and outside the mind are shaped by the predictions your brain makes about the body, the environment, and the interactions between them. Our sense of self, our awareness of being an agent in the world, emerges from the brain's constant attempts to anticipate and interpret sensory input and to minimize prediction error. The difference between expectation and actual input. Neuroimaging and experimental evidence increasingly support this view. Brain activity often reflects predictions before sensory input even arrives, and discrepancies between expectation and input trigger neural responses designed to refine the brain's internal model. This framework explains why perceptual experiences can be so flexible and why reality can sometimes feel unstable. Hallucinations, dreams, and certain psychiatric conditions illustrate the brain's capacity to generate a coherent reality entirely internally without a reliable external reference. The same mechanisms that allow us to navigate and interpret the world effectively can also lead to profound distortions when predictive models are inaccurate or misaligned. The brain's construction of reality is also deeply efficient. Processing every bit of sensory data in full detail would be computationally overwhelming. Instead, the brain uses predictions to focus on the most relevant information, filling in gaps and discarding redundant signals. In this way, perception is a form of intelligent compression, where the experience we inhabit is a manageable, interpretable version of a far more complex world. Learning, adaptation, and plasticity are integral to this process. The brain constantly updates its predictive models based on new experiences, allowing perception to become more accurate over time. When we enter a new environment, we may initially misperceive or struggle to make sense of it. As we accumulate experience, the brain refines its predictions, and the world begins to feel coherent and familiar. This explains why expertise or familiarity can dramatically alter perception. A musician hears subtleties in a complex piece that a novice cannot detect. A driver navigating a busy city recognizes patterns that would overwhelm an unfamiliar observer. Even memory is shaped by the brain's constructive tendencies. Recollections are not precise recordings of past events, but reconstructions influenced by context, expectation, and current knowledge. The brain treats memories as part of its predictive toolkit, allowing it to simulate possible futures, plan actions, and interpret ambiguous situations. In this sense, perception, memory, and reality construction are inseparable. Understanding that reality is actively constructed by the brain has profound philosophical and practical implications. It challenges the notion of an objective, observer, independent world and invites us to reconsider concepts like truth, knowledge, and consciousness. It encourages a more humble approach to human experience, recognizing that our perceptions are shaped by biology, experience, and context. It also has practical significance in medicine, psychology, and artificial intelligence, where appreciating the predictive nature of perception can inform the treatment of perceptual disorders, mental health conditions, and the design of intelligent systems. Ultimately, accepting that reality is a brain-generated construct does not diminish the richness or significance of experience. On the contrary, it reveals the extraordinary ingenuity of the mind, a finite, biological organ capable of producing the infinite complexity, coherence, and beauty of the world as we perceive it. Our experience is not merely a passive reflection of the universe, but an active creation, a continuous dialogue between prediction and input, expectation and sensation, imagination and reality, where every moment we inhabit a reality that is uniquely, dynamically, and astonishingly ours. Perception is often thought of as a passive process. Light hits the eyes, sound reaches the ears, pressure stimulates the skin, and the brain simply records these signals to create a faithful representation of the world. But this is far from the truth. The second key point, that perception is prediction, and that our brain continuously guesses the causes of sensory input, reveals a radically different understanding of how we experience reality. Rather than passively observing the world, the brain is constantly generating hypotheses about what it expects to encounter. Every sensory signal is interpreted in the context of these predictions, and the brain's interpretation is only updated when incoming information conflicts with its expectations. This predictive framework explains why perception is remarkably fast, efficient, and coherent, yet also why it can be so easily fooled. The brain receives an overwhelming torrent of sensory data at every moment, far more than it could ever process in full detail. If it attempted to process each signal objectively, perception would be slow and fragmented. Instead, the The brain relies on prior experience and learns statistical regularities to anticipate what is most likely occurring in the environment. These predictions act as a filter, allowing the brain to focus on deviations from expectation, which carry the most informative content. For instance, when walking down a familiar street, we rarely consciously process every detail, the color of each window frame or the shape of every leaf. Our brain predicts these details, filling in information based on memory and context, so we can attend to what is unexpected or important. In this sense, perception is not merely a mirror of the world, but a controlled hallucination constrained by sensory input. Experiments in neuroscience and psychology demonstrate the predictive nature of perception in striking ways. In visual processing, the brain exhibits anticipatory activity before a stimulus even appears, preparing itself for likely inputs. When expectations match reality, processing is smooth and perception feels effortless. When expectations are violated, we notice the discrepancy, which can produce a sense of surprise or even a perceptual error. This mechanism underlies illusions, which are not failures of vision, but evidence of the brain's reliance on prediction. A classic example is the way we perceive color. The colors we see are not absolute properties of light waves, but are interpreted by the brain based on surrounding context, illumination, and prior knowledge. Shadows, reflections, and ambiguous lighting can lead the brain to perceive colors differently than they really are, because the brain's predictions fill in missing or ambiguous information to maintain a coherent representation. Predictive perception also explains auditory phenomena. When listening to speech, the brain anticipates upcoming words and phonemes based on context, grammar, and prior knowledge. This allows for rapid comprehension even in noisy environments. When predictions fail, such as hearing a word we did not expect, we are momentarily thrown off, highlighting how perception is an active negotiation between expectation and input rather than a simple recording of reality. Beyond vision and hearing, prediction shapes our entire sensory experience. Touch, proprioception, and even interoception, the sense of the body's internal state, are filtered through anticipatory models. When reaching for an object, the brain predicts the expected weight and resistance. If the actual feedback differs, we experience surprise or adjustment. This predictive system is not a minor enhancement, it is fundamental to the way the brain maintains a coherent and continuous sense of self and world. Misperceptions, errors, and hallucinations are extreme manifestations of predictive processing, where the brain's expectations outweigh sensory input. Dreams, for instance, occur in the absence of external input, yet the brain generates vivid, coherent experiences entirely from prediction and memory. Similarly, certain psychiatric or neurological conditions, such as schizophrenia or phantom limb sensations, illustrate how perception can be dominated by prior expectations rather than current sensory reality. In these cases, the brain's predictions are misaligned with input, producing experiences that feel real despite lacking an external counterpart. The predictive nature of perception also explains why context, attention, and prior knowledge are so powerful. A word, image, or sound can be interpreted in entirely different ways depending on what the brain expects to encounter. Two observers may witness the same scene yet perceive it differently because their brains bring unique predictions shaped by experience, culture, and current mental state. This predictive framework extends to learning and adaptation. As we interact with the world, the brain constantly updates its models, improving its ability to anticipate sensory input. This is why practice and experience enhance perception. A musician or athlete perceives subtle patterns that a novice cannot, because their brain has learned predictive models that anticipate these sensory events. This ongoing calibration ensures that perception remains efficient, accurate, and adaptable, enabling humans to navigate complex environments with remarkable skill. The brain's predictive approach to perception also illuminates the connection between perception and action. The brain does not simply react to sensory input. It actively predicts the outcomes of potential actions, allowing for smooth coordination and decision-making. Reaching for a cup of coffee involves anticipating its weight, texture, and resistance. Walking across uneven terrain requires predicting the stability of each step. These predictions allow the brain to preemptively correct movements, maintaining balance and control. In this way, perception and action are intimately linked, both driven by predictive mechanisms that optimize interaction with the environment. Understanding that perception is prediction has profound implications for philosophy, psychology, and neuroscience. It challenges the traditional notion that humans passively perceive an objective reality, suggesting instead that consciousness is fundamentally an inferential process. The world we experience is a dynamic synthesis of sensory input and anticipatory modeling, where the line between reality and prediction is blurred. This perspective shifts how we understand cognition, learning, and even mental health, highlighting the importance of the brain's expectations in shaping experience. Accepting that perception is prediction also encourages humility in how we interpret our own experiences. What feels immediate and certain, what we call reality, is not a direct reflection of the world, but a negotiation between incoming signals and the brain's best guess about what is out there. Every sensation, from the sight of a sunset to the touch of a loved one's hand, is filtered through layers of expectation, shaped by evolution, experience, and context. This insight transforms our understanding of the mind and invites us to explore the astonishing complexity of conscious experience, where every perception is both a response to the world and a construction of the brain, continuously hypothesizing, testing, and refining its model of reality. Our conscious experience is not a passive record of events unfolding around us, but an intricate dance between expectation, interpretation, and sensation. The third key point, that conscious experience is deeply intertwined with expectations and prior knowledge, illuminates the profound complexity of perception and the mind itself. Every moment of awareness, every feeling of certainty about the world, is shaped by what the brain predicts will happen and what it has learned from previous encounters. Consciousness does not arise from sensory input alone. It emerges from the brain's constant negotiation between what is expected and what is actually sensed. This framework explains why perception is subjective, malleable, and at times illusory. Our brains operate as prediction engines, using accumulated knowledge to generate expectations about the world, the body, and the self. These predictions are not limited to the external environment. They extend to internal states, emotions, and bodily sensations. For example, when we anticipate holding a warm cup of tea, the brain preemptively constructs an experience of warmth, weight, and texture. If the cup is heavier or colder than expected, a discrepancy arises, prompting an update in the internal model. Even subtle deviations between expectation and input can produce noticeable effects on conscious experience, revealing how deeply intertwined anticipation and sensation are. This predictive mechanism allows consciousness to be efficient, coherent, and continuous. Without prior knowledge guiding interpretation, sensory input would be overwhelming and disjointed. Consider language comprehension. Words and sentences arrive rapidly, and without a predictive framework, understanding them in real time would be nearly impossible. The brain uses context, grammar, and experience to anticipate meaning, enabling fluent conversation and comprehension. Similarly, our perception of motion, depth, and causality relies on expectations about how objects behave, how light interacts with surfaces, and how physical forces operate. These expectations are informed by a lifetime of learning, observation, and experience, and they shape every conscious impression we have of the world. Conscious experience is also profoundly influenced by memory. Memories provide a rich repository of prior knowledge that informs predictions. When we encounter a familiar environment, the brain draws on stored patterns to anticipate sensory input, filling in gaps and smoothing inconsistencies. This is why a familiar room feels coherent even in low light, why a song evokes vivid recollections, and why faces are recognized instantly despite variations in expression or angle. Consciousness is an active reconstruction, integrating incoming data with prior experience to generate a unified experience of self and environment. Expectations not only shape perception of the external world, but also influence the perception of our own bodies. Interoception, the sense of the internal state of the body, is guided by predictions about heart rate, respiration, hunger, and other physiological signals. The brain constantly anticipates these states and compares incoming signals to predicted values. When predictions match reality, the body feels stable and coherent. When they do not, we may experience discomfort, anxiety, or confusion. This predictive integration of bodily states into conscious experience is essential for maintaining a sense of self, agency, and embodiment. The emotions themselves are intertwined with expectation and prior knowledge. When something surprising occurs, the brain rapidly updates its predictive model, generating a conscious experience of surprise, joy, fear, or disappointment. Anticipation of future events amplifies emotional responses, illustrating how consciousness is not merely reactive, but inherently forward-looking. Even what we consider attention is shaped by expectations. The brain allocates resources preferentially to predicted important stimuli, enhancing processing efficiency and shaping conscious awareness. The malleability of conscious experience is strikingly evident in illusions, hallucinations, and altered states. In these phenomena, the brain's predictions dominate sensory input, creating experiences that feel as real as veridical perception. Dreams offer a vivid example in the absence of external stimuli. The brain constructs a complete, coherent experience of a world that exists entirely in the mind, guided by memory, emotion, and expectation. Similarly, visual illusions exploit the brain's reliance on prior knowledge and predictive rules, revealing that what we see is not a direct recording of the world, but a synthesis of expectation and sensation. Cultural and individual differences further illustrate the role of expectations in shaping consciousness. People with different experiences, beliefs, or expertise perceive the same sensory input differently because their brains generate distinct predictive models. A musician may hear subtle harmonics that a non-musician misses. A seasoned hiker may detect patterns in terrain invisible to a novice. And someone with a strong cultural framework may interpret social cues differently than someone from another background. Conscious experience is therefore deeply personal, sculpted by the interplay of sensory input and the brain's predictions informed by prior knowledge. This understanding challenges traditional notions of objective perception and reveals that consciousness is not merely a passive reflection of the world, but a constructive, inferential process. Our sense of reality, the feeling of being present and aware, is continuously generated by predictive mechanisms. The seamlessness of conscious experience belies the underlying complexity at every instant. The brain compares predictions to incoming data, resolves discrepancies, and updates its internal model, creating a fluid narrative that we experience as reality. Attention, expectation, memory, emotion, and sensory input are all integrated into this ongoing construction. Awareness of this predictive process also illuminates how cognitive biases and perceptual errors arise. Because expectations shape experience, preconceived notions, prior knowledge, and context can distort perception. Confirmation bias, selective attention, and expectation-driven illusions are natural outcomes of a system designed to prioritize efficiency and coherence over raw accuracy. They demonstrate that consciousness is not a mirror of the world, but a tailored experience optimized for adaptive function. The predictive nature of conscious experience has practical implications across psychology, neuroscience, education, and artificial intelligence. By understanding how expectations and prior knowledge shape perception, we can design interventions to correct misperceptions, enhance learning, and improve mental health. Cognitive therapies, perceptual training, and mindfulness practices all exploit the brain's predictive tendencies to alter conscious experience, demonstrating the profound influence of expectation on what we perceive, feel, and believe. Ultimately, consciousness is an active process of continuous prediction and reconstruction, in which prior knowledge, memory, and expectation shape every aspect of experience. It is this intricate interplay that allows humans to navigate complex environments, interpret subtle social cues, anticipate outcomes, and maintain a coherent sense of self. Every thought, sensation, emotion, and perception is filtered through the brain's predictive models, creating a reality that is deeply personal, highly adaptive, and astonishingly sophisticated, where experience is never a simple reflection of the external world, but a carefully constructed narrative informed by what we have learned, remembered, and anticipated. Our perceptions are not infallible windows onto the external world. And the fourth key point, that misperceptions and illusions reveal the brain's predictive nature, provides one of the clearest insights into the mechanisms of human consciousness. Every time our senses deceive us, or when we are fooled by an optical illusion, a mirage, or a cognitive bias, we are witnessing the predictive machinery of the brain at work. Misperceptions are not flaws in the system. They are a direct consequence of a perceptual apparatus optimized to interpret noisy and incomplete data rapidly and efficiently. The brain must constantly make inferences, and sometimes those inferences are inaccurate, revealing the gap between expectation and reality. Illusions, whether visual, auditory, or tactile, provide a window into the constructive nature of perception. Take visual illusions as an example. Images that appear to bend, move, or change color highlight the brain's reliance on prior assumptions to resolve ambiguity. When confronted with incomplete or conflicting information, the brain fills in gaps using past experience and learns statistical regularities. The resulting perception feels real, even when it contradicts the physical stimulus. In this way, illusions demonstrate that perception is an active process of hypothesis testing rather than a passive reflection of reality. Similarly, auditory illusions illustrate the predictive nature of sensory processing. The brain anticipates sounds based on context, pattern, and expectation. In cases where sounds are masked, distorted, or ambiguous, the brain interpolates missing information, creating a perception of continuity or structure that may not exist. This capacity allows us to understand speech in noisy environments and follow music, even when instruments are momentarily obscured. But it also opens the door to perceptual error, cognitive illusions, which occur at the level of thought rather than raw sensation, reveal that predictive mechanisms extend beyond the senses. The brain constantly seeks patterns, causal relationships, and meaning, often constructing narratives that are compelling yet inaccurate. These errors illustrate that perception is inseparable from cognition. What we see or hear is filtered through a framework of expectation and prior knowledge. Misperceptions are particularly revealing when they occur in novel or ambiguous situations. The brain relies more heavily on predictions when sensory input is uncertain, leading to a higher likelihood of perceptual error. For example, in low light, our visual system is prone to seeing shapes, faces, or movement that isn't present. These experiences highlight the brain's tendency to favor hypotheses that are statistically likely or evolutionarily advantageous, even at the cost of occasional inaccuracy. Hallucinations, both pathological and non-pathological, provide extreme examples of predictive perception. In dreams, the brain generates entirely coherent experiences without external input, constructing a virtual reality based on memory, expectation, and emotion. In certain psychiatric conditions, such as schizophrenia, predictive models become dysregulated, causing perceptions that deviate from external reality while remaining compelling to the observer. These phenomena underscore the fundamental principle that perception is not a direct copy of the world, but a constructed narrative that balances prior knowledge with sensory input. The brain's predictive tendencies are not limited to moments of error, they shape everyday perception. Even when we correctly perceive objects, motion, or sounds, our experience is filtered through anticipatory models. For instance, the perception of motion is heavily influenced by expectation. The brain predicts the trajectory of moving objects, allowing us to intercept a ball or navigate a crowded street with apparent ease. When predictions are slightly off, we notice subtle discrepancies, but the system is optimized for efficiency rather than perfect accuracy. Context plays a critical role in revealing the brain's reliance on prediction. The same stimulus can be perceived differently depending on surrounding cues, previous experience, or cultural background. A color may appear different against contrasting backgrounds. A sound may be interpreted as one word, or another depending on linguistic context. And ambiguous shapes can be seen as multiple objects depending on expectations. These effects demonstrate that perception is not a fixed response to input, but a dynamic construction guided by prior knowledge and prediction. The interplay between prediction and sensory input is also crucial for learning and adaptation. Misperceptions provide the brain with feedback. highlighting areas where predictions fail and models require refinement. Errors in perception are not merely mistakes, they are opportunities for the brain to update its expectations and improve future predictions. This learning process ensures that perception becomes increasingly aligned with environmental regularities over time, enhancing both survival and skill. Evolution has shaped the predictive nature of perception because it offers significant advantages. A brain that anticipates threats, rewards, and opportunities can respond faster than one that simply reacts. Even when these predictions lead to occasional error, the net benefit of rapid, efficient perception outweighs the cost of misperception. Optical illusions that trick our vision or misinterpretations of ambiguous sounds are small prices paid for a system capable of rapid, adaptive inference. The study of misperceptions and illusions has profound implications for neuroscience, psychology, and philosophy. By examining the conditions under which the brain's predictions fail, scientists gain insight into the underlying mechanisms of perception, cognition, and consciousness. Illusions are not curiosities, they are windows into the mind, revealing how the brain constructs experience from incomplete, noisy, and ambiguous data. Understanding these mechanisms also informs practical applications, from the design of visual displays and auditory interfaces to therapeutic interventions for perceptual and cognitive disorders. It teaches us humility in interpreting our own experiences. What feels immediate, certain, or real may be heavily influenced by predictive mechanisms that we are often unaware of. Recognizing that misperceptions are a natural outcome of a predictive system allows us to appreciate both the strengths and limitations of human perception. Our brains are not failing us when they misinterpret sensory input. They are performing the sophisticated task of constantly generating hypotheses, anticipating patterns, and constructing a coherent experience from a world that is inherently complex and uncertain. Even everyday errors, from misreading a word to mistaking a shadow for an object, reflect the same fundamental processes that allow us to navigate the world with speed, efficiency, and adaptability. The very fabric of conscious experience is shaped by this balance between prediction and input. Every illusion, every misperception, every moment of seeing something that is not there is a testimony to the brain's remarkable ability to construct reality from limited information. The errors are not anomalies but integral to the system, illuminating the principles by which the brain organizes experience. By studying misperceptions, we gain insight not only into the mechanics of the senses, but also into the architecture of thought, the formation of belief, and the emergence of subjective reality. The brain's predictive nature is a bridge between sensation and cognition, perception and interpretation, expectation and reality, revealing that consciousness itself is a product of continual inference and adjustment. Understanding ourselves and the world around us is inseparable from the realization that the reality we inhabit is actively constructed by the brain. And the fifth key point, that understanding this reshapes how we view ourselves, others, and the world, extends this insight from theory into profound practical and philosophical implications. Recognizing that perception is a predictive, constructive process forces us to reconsider fundamental assumptions about knowledge, truth, and the nature of experience. It challenges the notion that what we perceive is a direct reflection of an objective, external world, revealing instead that every observation, sensation, and thought is filtered through prior knowledge, expectation, and learned patterns. This perspective has profound implications for how we understand ourselves, the sense of self that we take for granted. Our continuity, agency, and identity is deeply entwined with the brain's predictive machinery. The brain continuously models the body, integrating sensory input and motor predictions to create a coherent sense of presence and control. Every movement, every intention, and every feeling is interpreted through this predictive lens. When predictions about bodily states or environmental interactions are violated, we experience phenomena like surprise, discomfort, or even dissociation, revealing the malleable nature of the self. This insight invites us to approach our identity with flexibility and humility. The self is not a fixed entity, but an emergent property of ongoing predictive processes that can adapt, reshape, and recalibrate in response to experience. It explains why personal growth, learning, and even recovery from trauma are possible. The brain's models of the body, the mind, and the world can be revised, expanded, and refined over time. Understanding the constructed nature of perception also reshapes how we view other people. Each individual experiences a unique version of reality, informed by their own prior knowledge, expectations, and predictive models. Two people witnessing the same event may perceive it differently, not because one is necessarily right and the other wrong, but because their brains are generating distinct predictions that shape conscious experience. This realization fosters empathy and tolerance, encouraging us to recognize that differences in perception, interpretation, and belief are natural consequences of a predictive model-driven mind. Social interactions, communication, and conflict can be better understood when we consider that people operate within individualized perceptual realities. Misunderstandings, disagreements, and even prejudice often arise from mismatched predictions and expectations rather than objective malice. Appreciating this can cultivate patience, curiosity, and openness, allowing us to engage with others more thoughtfully and compassionately. Beyond individual perception, understanding the brain's predictive construction of reality influences how we interpret and interact with the external world. It challenges the assumption that the world is always as it appears, highlighting the subtle, continuous interplay between observation, expectation, and interpretation. Scientific inquiry itself is an exercise in recognizing and accounting for this principle. Experiments are designed to control for bias, expectation, and perceptual error precisely because our brains naturally fill in gaps, infer patterns, and prioritize predicted information. By acknowledging the predictive nature of perception, we can design better tools, interventions, and systems that account for the brain's inherent tendencies. This perspective has tangible implications in education, medicine, and technology. In learning, understanding that prior knowledge shapes perception can inform teaching methods that align new information with existing predictive frameworks, enhancing comprehension and retention. In medicine and psychology, recognizing how perception, expectation, and prior experience shape experience can improve diagnosis, treatment, and therapeutic techniques. For example, perceptual illusions, placebo effects, and cognitive biases all reveal the power of expectation in shaping experience, suggesting strategies for harnessing this predictive capacity to promote well-being. Technology and artificial intelligence also benefit from this insight. Designing systems that interact effectively with humans requires an appreciation for the predictive, context-sensitive nature of perception. Interfaces, virtual environments, and adaptive algorithms are more effective when they align with the ways human brains anticipate and interpret sensory input. In essence, understanding that reality is constructed equips us with tools to navigate, influence, and enhance human experience across diverse domains. On a philosophical level, this understanding encourages a profound reevaluation of truth, knowledge, and objectivity. If perception is prediction, then certainty is always provisional, contingent on the brain's current model and available information. What we perceive as real is a negotiation between sensory input and expectation, a continuously updated approximation rather than an absolute. This insight does not diminish experience, it enriches it, revealing the extraordinary complexity and adaptability of consciousness. It also inspires curiosity and humility, reminding us that our perspective is always limited, filtered, and constructed. Recognizing the brain's predictive nature opens the door to transformative practices in mindfulness, meditation, and contemplative inquiry. By observing how expectations shape experience, we can develop greater awareness of mental habits, perceptual biases, and emotional responses. This awareness allows us to engage with the world more intentionally, to notice when predictions dominate perception, and to cultivate a more fluid, responsive consciousness. Creativity, imagination, and innovation are likewise informed by this understanding. The brain's capacity to generate predictive models enables simulation, foresight, and the mental rehearsal of possibilities. Artists, writers, scientists, and inventors all rely on the brain's predictive power to envision worlds, test scenarios mentally, and explore alternatives before they are realized externally. Understanding the mechanisms behind these processes provides insight into the sources of human creativity and problem solving. Importantly, this perspective also reshapes our approach to uncertainty, ambiguity, and risk. Since perception is constructed and predictions can be mistaken, the world is always somewhat uncertain and human experience is inherently probabilistic. By internalizing this truth, we learn to navigate life with flexibility, adaptability, and resilience. Mistakes, surprises, and unexpected events are natural consequences of operating within a predictive system. They provide opportunities for learning, adaptation, and growth rather than evidence of failure. Understanding that reality is constructed also encourages a deeper appreciation for the richness and subjectivity of experience. Every color, sound, texture, and emotion is filtered through the brain's anticipatory models, making each moment of conscious awareness uniquely personal. Reality is not a static external entity, but a dynamic interplay of sensation, expectation, and interpretation. By acknowledging this, we gain insight into the beauty, complexity, and creativity inherent in human consciousness. Ultimately, this recognition reshapes how we live, interact, and think. It informs education, mental health, creativity, philosophy, and science. It encourages empathy, curiosity, and humility. It highlights the malleable nature of the self and the interpretive lens through which we experience others and the world. By understanding that our perception of reality is a predictive construct, we gain a powerful framework for navigating the uncertainties of life, for refining our understanding, and for cultivating a conscious awareness that is both grounded and expansive, embracing the infinite possibilities of human experience.